That night, the city slept, but hunger didn't. Ethan lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator that hadn't worked in months. Every sound felt louder when you had nothing left. His mother, Lily, sat on the edge of the bed, counting coins inside an old cookie tin. 32 cents, that was it. Her job at the restaurant had been her lifeline. Long shifts, sore feet, rude customers, but at least it was honest work. Until the new manager, Michael, came in with his polished shoes and colder eyes. She remembered his words like a bruise that refused to fade. "You're late again, Lily. We can't keep covering for you." She wanted to explain how the bus broke down, how she'd run the last mile under the rain, how her son waited alone after school. But her mouth stayed shut. Pride and desperation always fought inside her, and pride usually lost. Now, sitting in the dark, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I can find something else. Maybe tomorrow." But she knew the truth. Jobs didn't wait for single mothers with gaps in their resumes. Ethan stirred in his sleep, mumbling softly. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. He was only 9, yet his eyes carried questions too big for his age. In the morning, she woke early and walked to the pawn shop 2 streets away. The bell above the door jingled, weak and tired. The man behind the counter barely looked up. "How much for this?" she asked, placing her wedding ring on the counter. He turned it in his fingers, then shrugged. 20. She hesitated. "It's gold." He raised an eyebrow. "Plated." The ring had once symbolized promises. Now it was just metal. She took the money, not because it was fair, but because she had no choice. When she came home, Ethan was waiting by the window, his bike gleaming beside him. "Mom, I was thinking," he said quietly, "we can sell it. My bike. It's still new. People like bikes, right?" Her heart twisted. "Baby, no, that's yours." He shook his head, stubborn in the way only love can make someone brave. "You said sometimes we have to give things up for the people we love." "I remember." She looked away, tears tracing silent lines down her face. "If you were there in that moment, what would you have done? Be honest. Comment your answer below. And if words fail you, just hit like to prove that compassion still matters. By afternoon, Lily folded her uniform one last time and placed it neatly on the bed. She didn't know what hurt more, losing the job or knowing she'd never be able to tell Ethan why she was late that day. He had waited at school in the rain, clutching his homework folder, the last kid picked up again. When she finally arrived, drenched and breathless, the teacher's look had said everything. "He deserves better," that look had whispered. Now, she stood by the window, watching Ethan push the bike out the door. The chain clicked rhythmically, like a heartbeat she didn't want to lose. "Be careful," she called softly. "I will." He turned the corner, small against the wide world, carrying not just the bike, but the weight of growing up too soon. And that's where everything began to change. Ethan wheeled the bike carefully down the cracked sidewalk, his sneakers splashing through puddles. The morning air smelled like wet asphalt and cheap coffee from the cafe at the corner. He didn't really know how selling a bike worked. He only knew his mother hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, and that was enough reason. He stopped in front of a small shop with a handwritten sign, "We buy, we fix, we trade." The windows were clouded with dust, and a single bulb flickered above the door. He hesitated, tracing the handlebar with his thumb one last time. A man inside looked up from his counter, mid-40s, with grease-stained hands and kind eyes behind scratched glasses. "Need a tune-up, kid?" he asked, wiping his palms on a rag. Ethan swallowed hard. "I need to sell it." The man tilted his head, surprised. "Sell it? It's a good bike. Looks new." Ethan nodded. "It is. But my mom needs money for dinner." The man froze. He'd heard all kinds of reasons from desperate adults, but from a child, it hit different. He crouched to meet Ethan's eyes. "Where's your mom, son?" "At home," Ethan whispered. "She doesn't know I'm here. Please, just tell me how much I can get." The man sighed, torn between pity and practicality. "I could give you 50, but that's low for a bike like this." Ethan blinked quickly. "That's enough." As he handed over the handlebars, his fingers lingered a second too long, like saying goodbye to a friend. The man watched him walk away, small shoulders hunched against the drizzle, Something about that sight settled heavy in his chest. When Ethan returned home, Lily was standing at the door, pale and trembling. "Where were you?" He held out the crumpled bills, his voice shaking. "I sold it, Mom. Now we can buy food." Her knees gave out. She pulled him into her arms, crying silently into his hair. "Oh, Ethan, you shouldn't have. That was your dream." He smiled through his own tears. "You're my dream, Mom." She looked at him, really looked, and realized he was no longer a boy asking for comfort. He was her reason to keep breathing. That night, they ate rice and eggs, the first warm meal in days. Ethan made jokes, trying to make her laugh. For a while, the room didn't feel so empty. But somewhere across town, another story was unraveling. Michael, the restaurant manager, who had fired Lily, sat at his polished desk, staring at his reflection in the dark window. His promotion hadn't felt like victory, it felt like silence. He thought of the woman who used to greet every customer with a tired smile, who once shared her umbrella with him in the rain. Outside the subway, late again, he had said coldly, "Please, sir, just 5 more minutes," she'd pleaded. He'd ignored her. The company had been pushing him to cut inefficient staff, and her name was easy to write down. He hadn't thought about the boy waiting at home, until now. Something gnawed at him, a quiet guilt he couldn't shake. He opened his drawer and pulled out a crumpled note, one she'd accidentally left behind months ago. When she'd filled in for another waitress, it said, "Remind Ethan to drink milk before bed. Love, Mom." He stared at it for a long time. Then, without quite knowing why, he stood, grabbed his coat, and left. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Write yes and tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think. The rain hadn't stopped when Michael reached the narrow street Lily lived on. The building looked forgotten by the city, peeling paint, a flickering hallway light, and the faint smell of mildew. He climbed the stairs, clutching a brown envelope in his hand. When Lily opened the door, her eyes widened in disbelief. "You?" He nodded awkwardly. I wanted to apologize." She stood silent, unsure whether to slam the door or listen. "You already took everything. What's left to say?" Michael hesitated, then held out the envelope. "There's a job opening at the company's warehouse. Day shifts, better pay. I spoke to HR, they'll call you tomorrow if you want it." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about your situation, about your son." She crossed her arms. "You didn't ask." He nodded. "You're right." For a long moment, the hallway was filled only with the sound of dripping rain. Then Lily stepped aside slightly, her anger softening just enough. "You'd better not be lying." "I'm not," he said. "I just wanted to make something right." She looked down at the envelope, then at him. Why now? Michael's answer was simple, almost broken. "Because sometimes doing the right thing comes too late, and I don't want this to be one of those times." She didn't respond, but she didn't close the door either. And that, for now, was enough. Inside, Ethan peeked from behind the curtain, watching the man who had once made his mother cry walk away through the rain, slower this time, like someone who had finally remembered how to feel. And somewhere deep inside Lily's tired heart, a small light began to flicker again. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the cracked blinds, landing softly on Ethan's face. He blinked awake, his small hand reaching instinctively toward the spot where his bike used to rest. It wasn't there anymore, just a faint ring of dust on the floor. For a second, the emptiness pressed heavy on his chest, but then he heard his mother humming in the kitchen. It was a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Lily was frying eggs, her hair pulled back, her posture a little straighter. Hope had quietly found its way back into that tiny apartment. She turned when he entered. "Good morning, sleepyhead." He rubbed his eyes, smiling faintly. "Smells good." "Someone came by last night," she said, carefully keeping her tone even. "My old boss. He offered me a job, a different one." Ethan tilted his head. "The man who fired you." She nodded. "Yes, I think he's trying to fix what he broke. Are you going to take it?" She hesitated, spatula in hand. "I'm not sure yet." He frowned. "But you always say we should forgive people when they try to do better." Her lips curved. "Bittersweet. I did say that, didn't I?" for the first time in a long while. Breakfast tasted like possibility. Later that afternoon, Lily ironed her one good blouse and took the bus downtown. The warehouse job wasn't glamorous lifting, organizing, packaging, but it was stable, reliable, and it meant she could finally stop worrying about every meal. As she walked through the rows of boxes, the foreman, a woman named Grace, greeted her warmly. "You must be Lily. Michael told me about you. Said you're hardworking. We could use that kind of spirit here." Lily blinked, surprised. "He said that?" Grace nodded. "Yeah, he said he made a mistake letting you go. Happens to the best of us, right?" That sentence stayed with Lily the whole day. Not because it erased what happened, but because it reminded her that people could change, even if it took losing something first. When she got home that evening, she brought groceries, real ones this time. Bread, milk, a small chicken, even apples. Ethan's eyes widened as he unpacked the bags. "Mom, this is so much." He gasped. She laughed softly. "It's not much, baby, but it's ours." That night, the smell of roasted chicken filled their home. The laughter that followed echoed through thin walls, and even the old refrigerator hummed in rhythm, like it had been waiting for this. Meanwhile, across town, Michael sat alone in his office again. But this time, the silence didn't feel cold. He had written a letter, a resignation, resting neatly on his desk. He wasn't proud of how he'd gotten here, but he was learning to live with his choices, one apology at a time. He looked at the company logo on the glass door and exhaled slowly. He'd been chasing power for so long that he'd forgotten what respect sounded like. Maybe helping Lily wasn't redemption, but it was a start. He closed the door behind him and stepped out into the evening air, lighter, freer, and a little less afraid of the man in his reflection. "Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you did recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight." Days passed, and the rhythm of life began to settle again. Lily worked hard, her hands blistered but her heart calm. She even started saving a few dollars each week, keeping them in an envelope labeled Ethan's dream. Ethan noticed. Though she didn't say it out loud, she was saving for another bike. One evening, as he waited outside her workplace, a familiar voice called out from behind, "Hey, bike kid." Ethan turned. It was the shop owner, the same man who'd bought his bike. He was pushing something shiny beside him. A bike, his bike. "I was tuning this up for someone," the man said with a grin. "Then I saw your mom's name on a delivery list from the warehouse. Figured I should ask." Ethan's mouth fell open. "You mean?" The man nodded. "I held onto it. Didn't feel right selling it. And something told me it might find its way back." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. "But I don't have the money." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You already paid. With kindness most adults forget exists." When Lily came out moments later, her son stood there beside the bike, hands trembling, face glowing with disbelief. "Mom." He gave it back. The man tipped his cap, walking away before she could speak. "Just promise me one thing, kid, ride it somewhere happy." She watched him disappear into the crowd, her eyes wet. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel cruel. It felt kind. And as Ethan pedaled down the street, wind brushing through his hair, she whispered to herself, "Maybe good hearts always find their way back home." The wind roared softly in Ethan's ears as the wheels spun faster, gliding down the quiet street painted gold by the setting sun. His laughter echoed between the apartment walls, breaking through the fatigue that had once filled that place like smoke. Lily leaned against the doorway, hand pressed to her chest, smiling wider than she had in months. That bike wasn't just metal and rubber. It was a heartbeat that had found its way home. Later that evening, as she tucked Ethan into bed, he whispered, "Mom, do you think that man will ever know how much it meant?" She smoothed his hair. "Sometimes people don't need to know, sweetheart. They just feel it, somewhere deep down." The next morning, Lily caught an earlier bus to work. She carried a lunchbox this time, a small sandwich, a folded napkin, and a note Ethan had slipped inside. "Have a good day. Mommy, don't forget to smile." The warehouse buzzed with life, forklifts humming, boxes sliding across conveyor belts, radios playing faintly from a distant corner. For the first time, Lily felt part of something steady. She worked with quiet focus, moving carefully, grateful for every hour. At lunch, Grace sat beside her on a stack of crates, sipping from a thermos. "You know," she said, "I was a single mom once too. My son's 20 now. You remind me of how hard I used to fight." Lily smiled softly. "Does it get easier?" Grace paused. "No, but it gets worth it." They laughed, sharing stories about burnt dinners, missed buses, and the strange beauty of raising a child alone. That night, as Lily walked home under flickering streetlights, she noticed a man sitting on the steps outside her building, Michael. His clothes were damp, his hair a mess, his face tired in a way that wasn't from work. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her distance. He looked up slowly. "I resigned." She frowned. "You what?" "I couldn't do it anymore," he said quietly. "I fired people to impress a boss who'd forget my name next week. I saw too much of my father in myself, and that scared me." Lily folded her arms. "You expect me to feel sorry for you?" He shook his head. "No, I just wanted to thank you. You reminded me what decency looks like." She studied him for a long moment, the streetlight catching the rain on his jacket. There was no arrogance in his eyes now, just remorse. "You're trying," she said finally. "That's something. I don't deserve forgiveness," he murmured. "Maybe not," she said softly. "But you can still earn peace." The silence stretched, filled with the hum of traffic and the distant laughter of children playing down the street. "Take care of your boy," he said finally, standing. "He's the kind of person this world needs more of." Lily nodded, watching him walk away. For once, there was no anger in her heart, only a quiet release, like exhaling after years of holding breath. If that moment hit you hard, leave a. Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of healing settled between mother and son like sunlight filtering through leaves. Lily started attending night classes, determined to finish her diploma. Grace helped her fill out forms, cheering her on like an older sister. One evening, while Lily studied at the kitchen table, Ethan sat beside her drawing something on a piece of paper. When she looked over, her heart clenched. He had drawn the three of them, his mom, himself, and Michael, standing in front of a small restaurant with a big sign, Ethan's Diner, where kindness is served hot. She chuckled softly. "That's beautiful, honey." "Why a diner?" "Because when you cook," he said with a grin, "people feel happy. You make them full, not just in their tummy, but in their heart too." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You're something else, you know that." He shrugged proudly. "I'm your son." Lily stared at the drawing long after he'd gone to bed. It wasn't just a dream, it was a reminder. Maybe one day, when life was kinder, she could open that diner. A place where no one would feel invisible. A place where every plate carried warmth. She folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside her purse, next to the envelope labeled Ethan's Dream. Outside, the city continued its restless noise, cars honking, dogs barking, sirens wailing. But inside that small apartment, there was peace, a fragile, precious peace earned through love, loss, and small mercies that stitched broken hearts back together. And for the first time in a long while, Lily whispered a prayer, not for help, but for gratitude. "Thank you for giving us enough." Morning sunlight streamed across the table where the folded diner drawing still rested. Edges curled slightly from Ethan's eager crayon strokes. Lily looked at it while sipping instant coffee, the steam fogging her tired glasses. It had been 3 months since she started at the warehouse, and though every day left her exhausted, the ache was different now, purposeful, almost proud. Ethan, now taller by a few inches, sat by the window doing homework, occasionally glancing at the bike leaning against the wall. He had decorated it with stickers, stars, hearts, a tiny one that said, "Keep going, Mom." He said suddenly, breaking the silence, "Do you ever miss your old job? The restaurant?" She paused, thinking. "I miss the people, the laughter, but I don't miss how it made me feel, like I was small." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, tapping his pencil. "Maybe one day you'll have your own restaurant. Then you can make the rules." She smiled faintly. "Maybe one day we will." After work that evening, Lily stopped by the same pawn shop where she'd once sold her wedding ring. The bell jingled as she entered. The shopkeeper, The same older man looked up with surprise. "You again," he said warmly. "You look better. I feel better," she admitted, placing something small on the counter. A bracelet she'd found while cleaning. "How much for this?" He examined it, then looked at her. "Why sell it? Doesn't look like you need to anymore." She smiled softly. "Not for me. It's for someone else." The man raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He gave her $20. The next morning, Lily packed a small bag, sandwiches, fruit, and 2 bottles of water. She and Ethan took the bus across town to the city shelter. "Mom," Ethan whispered as they walked past the long line of people waiting for meals. "Why are we here?" "Because," she said gently, "there was a time when we could have been standing right here, and I never want to forget that." They spent the afternoon serving food, handing out smiles, and listening to strangers' stories. One man, thin and sunburned, took his sandwich with trembling hands. "You're an angel," he whispered. Lily shook her head. "No, just someone who remembers what it feels like to need help." Ethan watched her quietly, the pride in his chest swelling until he thought it might burst. As they rode the bus home that evening, he leaned against her shoulder. "I like this version of you," he murmured. She laughed softly. "This version?" "The one who's happy," he said simply, and for once, she didn't argue. "Be honest, could you forgive after what they did? Type forgive if you could, or never if it would break you too deeply." That night, the rain returned light, tapping softly against the window pane. Lily stood by the glass, staring at the blurred lights below, her mind wandering back to Michael. She hadn't seen him since that night outside her building. Curiosity tugged at her. Was he okay? Did he ever find peace? The next morning, as she arrived at work, Grace waved her over. "Hey, guess what? We're getting a new logistics manager. Starts next week." "Some guy named Michael." Lily froze, her heart skipping. "Michael?" "Yeah," Grace said. "He used to work for the same restaurant chain you did. Seems nice. You know him?" Lily's mouth went dry. "Yeah, I know him." The following week, he walked through the warehouse doors, dressed plainly this time. No expensive suit, no arrogance, just quiet humility. When his eyes met hers, the world seemed to pause. He gave a small nod, unsure if she'd acknowledge him. But she did. Just a nod back, nothing more, nothing less. It was enough. During the break, he approached her slowly. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said. She looked up from her notebook. "I didn't think you'd come back." He gave a faint smile. "I'm not the same man I was, neither am I," she replied. They stood in silence for a while before he said softly, "You were right, you know. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it makes room for tomorrow." She studied him, this man who had once taken everything from her. And yet, now, standing there, he looked smaller somehow, not weak, but human. "Tomorrow's all any of us have," she said finally, and with that, she closed her notebook and walked back to her station, leaving him with a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. That night, she told Ethan about it. He listened, eyes wide. "Did you forgive him, Mom?" She smiled faintly. I just stopped needing to be angry." He nodded slowly. "That's kinda like forgiving, right?" "Yeah," she whispered. "Maybe it is." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the air smelled clean again, like something new beginning. The next morning began like any other, the hum of the old fridge, the smell of instant coffee, and the quiet shuffle of 2 lives learning to breathe again. But something about that day felt lighter. Lily tied her hair back, humming softly as she packed Ethan's lunch. She glanced at him across the table, his head buried in a notebook filled with doodles of bikes and small hearts. "Whatcha drawing this time?" she asked, pouring milk into his glass. He grinned. "A new version of the diner. This one's bigger, with a sign that says everyone's welcome." She chuckled, shaking her head. "You dream big, kiddo. You always tell me that's the only way to dream," he said. Beaming, she paused, realizing how true that was, and how much of her courage came from that little boy. At the warehouse, things began to change. Michael kept his distance at first, respecting the space Lily deserved. But over time, their paths crossed naturally, a shared task, a quiet joke, a small nod of acknowledgement. There was no awkwardness, no bitterness, only 2 people learning how to live better than before. One afternoon, Grace noticed them talking near the loading dock. "You just seem to get along now," she said later with a teasing grin. Lily smiled. "People change when they start listening instead of defending." Grace nodded approvingly. Maybe the world needs more of that. Meanwhile, Ethan was learning something too. At school, a boy named Caleb often sat alone during lunch, eating crackers from a torn packet. Ethan watched him for days before finally walking over. "You want half my sandwich?" he asked one afternoon. Caleb looked surprised. "Why?" "Because you look hungry," Ethan said simply. Caleb hesitated before taking it. "Thanks, you're nice," Ethan shrugged. "My mom says kindness grows if you feed it." That night, when Lily picked him up from school, he told her what happened. She listened quietly, eyes shimmering. "You did good, baby. I'm proud of you." He grinned. "Guess kindness really does come back. If you believe love still wins." Comment amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. Weeks turned into months, and life began to bloom again in small, steady ways. Lily received her first promotion, a modest raise, but it felt like a miracle. Grace hugged her tight. "Told you it'd be worth it," she said, laughing. Ethan started helping around the building, delivering groceries for neighbors who couldn't walk far. Every time he knocked on a door, someone smiled, and he collected those smiles like treasures. One chilly Friday evening, the doorbell rang. When Lily opened it, she found Michael standing there, holding an envelope. "Did I come at a bad time?" he asked. She blinked, surprised but calm. "No. Come in." He stepped inside, glancing around the small but cozy apartment. The drawing of Ethan's diner hung framed on the wall now. "You've made this place feel like home," he said softly. Lily crossed her arms, cautious but kind. "What's the envelope for?" He handed it to her. "A grant application. There's a small program helping single parents start local food businesses. I thought of you." She froze. "You thought of me?" He nodded. "You always talked about cooking at the restaurant. I remembered how people smiled when you served them. That's not just a job, Lily. That's a gift." She stared at the papers, fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he said, smiling. "And if you need help filling it out, I'll be around." Ethan peeked from his room, eyes wide. "Mom, what's happening?" She laughed softly. "Maybe something good." That night, after Michael left, Lily sat by the window with the application in her hands. The moonlight spilled over the pages, and for the first time, she let herself imagine what could be a diner, her diner, with laughter, warmth, and a sign that said everyone's welcome. Ethan crawled into her lap, resting his head against her chest. "Mom, are we going to open a diner?" She smiled, kissing his forehead. "One day, baby. Maybe sooner than we think." He yawned. "Then I'll be the waiter. I'll make sure everyone smiles." Lily's eyes softened. "Then it'll be perfect." Outside, the city lights shimmered like promises waiting to be kept. And in that small, quiet room, two hearts dared to believe again, not in miracles, but in second chances. The days that followed were filled with a strange, beautiful anticipation, the kind that lives between fear and hope. Every evening, Lily sat at the kitchen table, poring over the grant papers. She wasn't used to filling out forms that asked about dreams. Usually, they asked about debts, dependents, or overdue bills. Ethan sat beside her each night, drawing doodles in the margins to keep the paper happy, as he called it. "Mom," he said one evening, "if we open our diner, can we give free food sometimes?" She looked up from her pen. "Free food? Yeah, for people who can't pay. Like the man from the shelter." She smiled gently. "That's exactly the kind of diner we'll have." It took 2 weeks to finish the application, and another week of waiting that felt like forever. Every time the mailman's footsteps echoed down the hallway, Lily's heart raced. And then, one rainy afternoon, it came, a letter with the words Community Uplift Fund printed in bold. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Ethan watched from the couch, clutching a pillow. "Dear Ms. Reynolds," it read. "We are pleased to inform you that your proposal has been approved." Lily gasped, covering her mouth. Ethan jumped to his feet. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, her voice breaking, "we got it." They laughed, cried, and danced right there in their tiny kitchen, knocking over a chair in the process. For once, tears didn't taste like defeat, they tasted like rival. The following weeks blurred into a whirl of planning, permits, and late nights. Michael helped her secure the location, an old corner cafe that hadn't seen customers in years. Grace volunteered on weekends, helping scrub walls and paint. Even the bike shop owner stopped by one afternoon, handing Ethan a small sign that read, "Open Hearts, Open Doors." When the grand opening finally arrived, the morning sun flooded through clean windows, lighting up the freshly painted walls. The smell of coffee and warm bread filled the air. The sign outside read simply, "Ethan's Diner." Lily stood behind the counter, wearing an apron embroidered with tiny sunflowers. Ethan bounced beside her, trying to balance a tray of muffins. Grace arranged flowers on the tables while Michael stood quietly in the corner, smiling like someone watching a promise being fulfilled. The first customer, a tired delivery driver, walked in, squinting at the chalkboard menu. Lily greeted him with the same gentle warmth she once gave strangers when she had nothing to offer. "But kindness, welcome," she said. "You look like you could use a hot meal." He smiled faintly. "You have no idea." The diner filled slowly that day, neighbors, co-workers, old friends, even the pawn shop owner, who left a small bouquet near the register with a note, "For the woman who never stopped believing." Lily served every dish with gratitude, not pride. Every plate was a story, every smile a reminder, and when Ethan ran up at closing time, flour on his cheek, he said, "Mom, I think the world's a little fuller today." She laughed, pulling him close. "I think you're right. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still stayed kind." One click can be your way of saying, "I felt you." That night, when the diner lights dimmed and the door sign flipped to closed, Lily sat in any off the booths with a cup of tea. The room still smelled of cinnamon and laughter. Michael walked over, wiping his hands on a towel. "You did it," he said softly. She looked around. "We did it. All of us." He hesitated. "You ever think about how different things could have been if I hadn't fired you?" She met his gaze, smiling faintly. "Then maybe none of this would have happened." Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. Ethan, half asleep on a chair nearby, murmured, "You're both talking too much. Tomorrow's a big day." They chuckled quietly. Michael looked at the boy, then back at Lily. "He's got your spirit," she nodded. "No, he's got something better. Hope that doesn't give up." As the clock ticked past midnight, the city outside buzzed with life. But inside Ethan's diner, time felt sacred, like the end of one story and the quiet beginning of another. Lily whispered a final prayer into the soft hum of the night. For everyone still fighting their way through the dark, may they find their light, too. And somewhere, deep within that prayer, an invisible warmth spread, the kind that doesn't fade when morning comes. The morning after the grand opening smelled of promise, coffee brewing, bread baking, and sunlight spilling through the big front windows of Ethan's diner. Outside, the city yawned awake, but inside, laughter had already begun. The walls still carried the warmth from the night before, as if happiness had clung to the paint itself. Ethan wiped down the counter proudly, wearing a tiny apron with his name stitched in blue thread. Every now and then, he'd look at the door and grin whenever someone new walked in. Lily stood behind the register, tying her hair up as the first rush of customers began. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who had once carried the world on her shoulders, and somehow learned to dance with it instead. Grace worked the kitchen, humming an old tune. Michael brewed coffee near the back, sleeves rolled up, his usual stiffness replaced by something humble, almost tender. Ethan placed a steaming plate of pancakes on the counter and whispered, "Table 3, that's the old lady who helped me tie my shoe outside the market." I gave her extra syrup. Lily smiled. "You have your own regulars now?" He nodded proudly. "Kindness gets customers, Mom." She laughed, a sound bright enough to make everyone turn. For a brief moment, everything felt exactly right. But then, as the morning slowed, Lily noticed a man sitting alone near the window, thin, gray-haired, clothes too big for his frame. He looked at the food in front of him like he wasn't sure he deserved it. Something about his face tugged at her memory. She walked over quietly. "You okay, sir? Is everything all right with your meal?" He looked up slowly, eyes tired but kind. "It's more than all right. It's just, I used to come here years ago, when this place was falling apart. Never thought I'd see it alive again." She smiled softly. "It's a new start, for the diner, and for me too." He nodded. "Funny how places get second chances. People do too, if they're lucky." His words lingered long after he left. That night, as they cleaned up, Ethan found a folded note left on the man's table. It read, "Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs more of this kind of magic." Lily tucked the note into the register, right beside the envelope labeled Ethan's dream. But this time, the envelope wasn't for a bike or a wish. It was for something bigger. "Mom," Ethan said sleepily as they turned off the lights. "I think we made people feel full today." She brushed his hair back, whispering, "That's the best kind of full." They stepped outside into the cool night, locking the door behind them. The neon sign flickered gently, Ethan's Diner. Open hearts, open doors, across the glass. Their reflections looked back at them, to people who had been broken, rebuilt, and blessed all in the same lifetime. They walked home hand in hand. The streets quiet except for the hum of the world moving forward. If you believe love still wins, comment amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. Weeks later, Ethan's Diner became a small legend in their part of the city. People came not just for food, but for warmth, a place where the poor sat beside the rich, where no one left unseen. Lily started a pay-it-forward jar, and every week, someone dropped in enough to feed a stranger. One evening, she found Michael sitting at a corner table long after closing. He looked thoughtful, staring out the window. "Staying late again?" she teased. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how one simple decision can change everything." She nodded, sitting across from him. "You mean firing me?" He winced. "Yeah, that one." She looked around the diner, at the light, the laughter still echoing faintly, the love that filled the air. "Maybe it wasn't the worst thing," she said softly. "If you hadn't, I'd still be waiting tables, and none of this would exist." He looked at her, eyes glassy. "You found beauty in what broke you." She smiled. "Isn't that what we're all trying to do?" Outside, Ethan was feeding scraps to a stray dog near the curb. The dog wagged its tail, following him a few steps before curling beside the diner door. Lily watched, her heart swelling. "Kindness," she whispered, "always finds its way home." The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and for a moment, everything stood still. A mother, a son, a man redeemed, and a diner glowing like a promise that the world, no matter how cruel, still had corners of grace. If this story touched you, don't scroll away quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for Lily, for Ethan, for every soul who ever gave up something precious just to keep love alive. One click can be your way of saying, "I felt you," and somewhere, in a diner that once began as a boy's dream and a mother's desperation, a new story kept unfolding, not of hunger or hardship, but of hearts that refused to give up. Because sometimes, the smallest act of love can rewrite everything. Moral, even when life takes everything from you, never stop choosing kindness. The world might break you, but love, the quiet, unshakable kind, will always build you back stronger.